Hi, I'm Chloe Gardner, and this is my report on the Culturally Responsive Library. So, for starters, I listed out the table so that it was a little easier to see and where you could see that some had 0. But I also do have my table. So, for example, this one is just normal gender. So, 44.9% were non-human, 31.9% were male, 21.7% were female, and 1.4% were non-binary or more of non-gender specific. As you can see, there are more non-human characters portrayed out of the 50 books I chose in my classroom. The next highest was then male and then female. These were all each about a 10% decline. And then the smallest percentage for these books was the non-binary, non-gender specific category. And over here I have listed, that you can see the female main character or the female character, you can see the male, you can see the non-human, and you can see kind of how non-gender specific individual was portrayed over here in the last book. So for the main characters, it kind of was very similar to just the normal so non-human was 40%, male was 32%, female was 26%, and non-binary was 1.3%. I definitely had a lot more books that were non-human than anything. A lot of books have animals or just characters that were non-human, but were talking and walking. So then here for race, I will highlight, you can see that there were no native indigenous characters in my library. But so non-human again, almost 50% of all of the books out of race. And then you have your white characters, your African American, your Latinx, your Asian, and then your Middle Eastern Arab. Here we're at race. I will say that there were no native indigenous main characters, and there were also no main characters that are Middle Eastern, Arab American. So there was a book that had a Middle Eastern character in it, but that character was not the main one. So then again, we can see that 52.5% of these books had non-human characters. And then you have your 26.2% that's white, 14.8% African American, Latinx was 4.9%, and Asian was 1.6%. So as you can see, I had a very even split in books that were suburban versus urban at 41.2%, and then rural was 17.6%. Because of all the books that I had that were non-human, there were a lot of books set in the woods or in areas where there were no setting category for me to put on here. So that did, I think, skew the graph a little bit. I had no books that represented any individuals with disabilities out of the 50 books. I did think this was a little interesting just because 50 books is a very wide range and there were no characters that had disabilities. So for family structure, these are books that feature a family structure other than a mom, a father, and 2 children. I did have 6 of those books. Out of 50, that's still a very small amount of books. But I do have here, since I had a lot of non-human books, I did put how, like the Berenstain Bears or the 3 Little Pigs, this is a different family structure. So down here you can kind of see that they are different. For economic diversity, there were no books in the library that portrayed economic diversity. It also is kind of hard to read the fact that you don't know if they are or aren't struggling economically with poverty or anything in these books, so I did just put that at 0. And then religion. There were no books in the library that portrayed religion. There were no books that even showed individuals dressed in their cultural getup or in anything that would have any sort of religious background. So for my classroom demographics, I have more male students than I do female in my class. It's about half female to male. And then I have more white children than I do African American children. And if you do go back, you can kind of see I have none that have family who are transgender and non-binary. I have none that are Asian or Asian American, Latinx, Native Indigenous, or Middle Eastern. So it is very clear cut, like female, male, white, African American. So then for this one, there were a lot that weren't here. So for 48% of children lived in suburban areas, and then 12% lived in urban. I do live next to a city, so that's kind of why there are no rural. And then different family structures, I had 32.0%. A lot of the children in my class only have a mom, or a lot of them have 3 to 4 different siblings, and then 8% of them have family who have disabilities. So for my book recommendations, I did a book that portrays characters that have disabilities. It's called We Move Together. It also doesn't portray individuals that are a little bit different races, kind of a wider range than just white and African American. The next is a book that portrays characters that are Middle Eastern or Arab, but it also portrays religion. I think that would be a good book to fix that category. And then a book that portrays characters that are Native and Indigenous is called Rock Your Mocks. So a good mirror, the categories that were a good mirror are gender, race, and setting. These are good mirrors for the children because children can see their own gender in a book, can see people with their own race, and are able to see the books that showcase where they may live. For example, I have a book that features an African American family in the city, and then a child may be able to relate to this book because they could share similar experiences. So I have the book You See, I See in the City. This is looks like an African American little family with a girl and a dad, and they're just going around looking at the city. I do work in a daycare that's located right next to Cincinnati, Ohio. This is a bigger city that a lot of the children actually live in, so I do think this is a really good mirror because children can kind of see from, this perspective, like, oh, that's just like me. So a good window, my library is a good window in the categories of race, setting, and family structure. The books that are in the library under these categories do a good job of showing how life may be like for children. It allows children to put themselves in that perspective that takes place in these stories. So for example, some of the books portray a family where there are 3 children and 2 parents. It goes on to show how they could go through life, with a different family structure than that they already have. This is a good window for children to see and imagine how that life could be. In the library, we have an abundance of books that portray these categories for the children. As for the categories in our library that are not good windows, are disability, economic diversity, and religion. I have 0 books in the library through all of those categories, and so with these categories being important, it's unfortunate that we do not have books to portray these things for children. So down here, I have books that are a little bit of a good window for children. It shows different race. It shows a little bit of different setting and family structure. And then going back to my book recommendations is kind of where you can see where I filled in those gaps for good windows. So with disability and religion, I think it's really important to start putting books like that into our library.